Welcome to the Real Question Time. We're asking you guys the real questions about the issues that affect us all, without the experts from our mainstream media networks or the manipulation of our political leaders, and where we try and get down to basics and find out what we really feel and what really concerns us the most. I recently found myself in the middle of a crazy argument after apparently offending someone for calling them a Western Buddhist. I didn't even really call them that, in fact. Rather, it was just a reference to the context of Buddhism being studied in the West. It rapidly developed into a heated argument, and honestly, I still today don't understand what's so offensive about it. I think it was the fact that someone claiming to be a pacifist would react with such abrupt hostility that surprised me the most. I suggested she was being the tad oversensitive, and well, it just deteriorated and got all weird and silly from there. She claimed she was not a Westerner, but a person of this world, so I hinted that she is what? An Earthling? She responded by saying she was half Thai because she had previously lived in Thailand, despite being an Australian-born white Caucasian. I showed her my tattoo of Buddha in a gesture of solidarity, to which she replied was sacrilegious, as I'm not as good as Buddha, which I thought was just rude, as it seemed she could pluck and interpret the text and symbols to her convenience, but I couldn't. Despite my instincts to dig my heels in, I instead took a walk and gave it some thought, to try and understand where she was coming from. Clearly she believed I suggested she was a hypocrite, or words to that effect, yet that's not what I was doing at all. I was simply curious as to how Westerners who practice Buddhism fit their spiritual beliefs into their capitalist lives, as I'd read a lot of conflicting information between the philosophies taught and the realities of life in Western civilization. I had seen successful and wealthy Buddhists on television who claimed their wealth and success could be attributed to the teachings of Buddha. And to me at the time it all sounded a bit against the grain, as my understanding of Buddhism was about stepping off the wheel of karma by the removal of temptation, ego and greed, and where to fully gain enlightenment one must shed him or herself of all material possessions, just to get started. I understand, of course, not everyone is a monk, but the basic principles I understand remain the same. At the time I compared the superficiality of less committed followers of other biblical texts, where it seems many followers pick the verses and phrases that support their view and just ignore the contradictory ones. Christian Lander writes about stuff white people like in his new book, and he writes that among many things white people like are religions their parents don't belong to, or any religion that doesn't involve Jesus. He then goes on to mention Buddhism as a popular choice. When a white person tells you I'm a Buddhist, Hindu, Kabbalist, apparently the best thing to do is to ask how they arrived at their religious decision, as the story will most likely involve a trip to Thailand or a college class on religion. At least according to one random blog I stumbled across, where the author was complaining that while Buddhism is popular in the West nowadays, it's still not taken seriously as a religion. And while sincere and dedicated practice does exist, there is also a lot of superficiality. I spent time with monks in Thailand and Cambodia myself, actually, including an educational 2 weeks in a Bangkok monastery with a monk who seemed to be a master of just about everything on planet Earth, albeit with a severe tea drinking problem, and I spent the majority of the time there busting for a piss. He would watch my movements closely and ask subtle questions before proceeding to pierce all my materialistic barriers with his Daggrin heart revelations about my deeper secrets and my soul. Stuff I never expected would grace the lips of another human being. The experience turned what I thought I knew about the world on its head. The changes were subtle, but after walking out from the peace and tranquility inside those walls back into the chaos of Bangkok streets, I realised it did have a kind of soothing and calming effect on me, and the mayhem of the city just washed right off as I passed through it. Well, for a time anyways. Like so many other young travellers returning to their countries of origin after a similar experience, I thought it would be cool to become a Buddhist. So I started ticking that box on the census, did some reading, tried meditating, which I now admit all these years later I never really managed to do. Until eventually I just fell back into my old habits, albeit with a tale to tell. But the experience, I believe, has equipped me with at least the right to have an opinion about these wealthy so-called Buddhists I saw on TV. And at that time, in my less corrupted youth, I thought that they were babbling a load of hypocrisy, preaching one thing, yet doing another. Now, if Tibetan Buddhism differs from Thai Buddhism, is it not okay to assume there are differences again to those philosophies taught, for example, here in Australia, considering the structure and history of the society is different? I mean, we don't have monks walking the streets here. Students are not commonly ordained when they complete their secondary schooling and spend a period of time focusing on religious education. Allegedly, according to several sources on the net anyway, lamas in the West, even though they draw on traditional Buddhism, are in fact attempting to create a new style of Buddhist practice. One controversial lama claimed in his teachings that his intention was to strip the ethnic baggage away from traditional methods of working with the mind, and to deliver the essence of those teachings to his Western students. Australia is, of course, a society that was founded on a Protestant faith, and I believe the majority of Aussies have been christened, whether they believe in the church or not. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Another interesting observation is that consumer holidays are in fact ceremonious days in the Christian tradition. And in the modern age, the buying of gifts is the norm, which of course promotes greed and therefore aids the capitalist agenda. I wonder how many self-proclaimed and self-righteous Buddhists still participate in this tradition. Interesting also that there are articles on the net that suggest Buddha himself was actually originally an atheist. Love to hear some more about that one from all you beautiful people out there. Obviously the beliefs about the afterlife differ greatly. Reincarnation, in fact, is a topic I'd like to discuss further at a later date in a separate video. Anyway, moving on. So if Buddhism is a 3,000-year-old teaching, has it modernised as times, politics and technology has changed? There were interactions with Buddhism in the Roman world, including an interesting story about Sramana, a religious Indian man who burned himself alive to demonstrate his faith. German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche also praised Buddhism in his 1895 work, The Antichrist, calling it 100 times more realistic than Christianity. But it wasn't really until 1927 and the translation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead to English did many Westerners finally jump on the bandwagon. Some American soldiers who had fought in the Vietnamese War as well stayed on to try and understand the horror they witnessed and its context, some of whom studied the text and brought them home with them to America. The 60s and 70s and the hippie generation are also attributed to the growth of Buddhism in the West, proclaiming it as a natural path to awareness and enlightenment. Many people, including celebrities, travelled to Asia in pursuit of gurus and ancient wisdom, and by the 90s Buddhism had become the fastest growing religion in the West, in contrast, of course, to the steady decline of traditional beliefs such as Christianity. Now, another 2 decades later, are the ancient philosophies still valid and relevant in today's consumer world? Or has it morphed into many groups, subgroups and cults like Christianity, for example, has? There is no doubt teachers and lamas possess a kind of charisma that can be intoxicating and or alluring to their students. And there have, I understand, been some scandals where the lama has in fact shagged his students. So, does the transition from traditional East to modern West get a bit blurry from time to time? Allegedly, these kinds of scandals are, quote, most likely to occur in organisations that are in transition between the pure forms of charismatic authority that brought them into being and more rational corporate forms of organisation. So, what is the Dalai Lama today? Is he a religious leader, politician, or celebrity? And what is the ultimate goal for Buddhists in the West these days? Is it enlightenment, progression on the wheel of samsara, or just a peaceful and productive life? Is it just a philosophy of practicing inner peace, which emphasises meditation, balancing emotions, cultivating compassion, and developing insight as its 4 building blocks? And Buddhists in general just want to get away from skeptics like me who ask too many questions, seek to analyse, stereotype and pigeonhole everything. And is that why I never successfully managed to meditate? Because I think about it too much and try too hard? Is my Buddha tattoo sacrilegious? Even if I don't claim to be a Buddhist, and in fact it has another meaning to me altogether. And last, and I guess most important, for me at least, if I only wish to take a few of the teachings or a few of the principles of Buddhism, but not all, do I have the right to call myself a Buddhist? Well, thank you all for watching. I very much look forward to reading your comments and watching any video responses that you may have. Peace.